I've always been really drawn to this idea of productivity, but in the sense that as humans, we've really barely tapped our potential to perform and create. That's the angle that I was always fascinated with productivity about. But I also always sensed that there was something that the modern world was really getting wrong about productivity and dehumanizing us in the process. And, as an entrepreneur, I really got a taste for this sense of hustle, produce, maximize, etc. And it started to get to the point where I knew that this was toxic. And the modern world was not really offering too many alternatives. So I had to balance with my own practice, my own spiritual practice and meditation, etc. And then a few years ago, people in the productivity space started expressing this resistance, and I was really happy. And one of the people who has been kind of a beacon of this, what I think, voice of sanity when it comes to productivity is Cal Newport. And his recent book, Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishing Without Burnout, really got my attention. I picked it up. And this video is not going to be a book review or a full summary or anything, but I'm going to bring in a couple of concepts from Newport to talk about productivity and sort of rethink this relationship we have with our work and with our creation, because there's some things that are really pushing us in the wrong direction that are not going to be sustainable and really drive us to chronic health issues, psychological challenges, and spiritual crisis. So let's talk about this. So one of the first things, Newport does is he defines the metric that we're all running on right now around the world, which is what he calls pseudo-productivity. Okay. So think about this, back in the days of the Industrial Revolution and manual production, measuring productivity was a whole different game, right? Like it's kind of easy to analyze how many widgets a specific production line has produced and how even a single member of that production line has produced in a given day, in a given number of hours, right? That's a more tangible way to measure. It's a literal tangible number that you can, connect to a sense of productivity. But what's happened as the world transformed dramatically into a world of ideas and technology, into a world of what Newport calls knowledge workers, right? And that's what most of us are. Of course, there is still manual labor. There is still tangible production. The majority of us, however, are in this category of knowledge workers. We're working in the world of ideas where our deliverables are not so tangible and measurable and concrete, right? However, the form of measuring productivity has not updated with this shift in work. And so we're trying to use metrics that were maybe appropriate for the industrial age into the era of information and knowledge workers. And so pseudo-productivity is, here's Newport's definition, the use of visible activity as the primary means of approximating actual productive effort. In other words, we feel productive the more stuff we're doing, visible activity. And in the era of knowledge work, what does visible activity mean? It means how many emails am I responding to? How active am I on Slack? How many clicks here, clicks there, how many touches? And that's really detrimental to actual productivity. In fact, it's the opposite of productivity. It gets us sucked into this cycle of pseudo-productivity. So what's Newport's solution? So I'm going to give a real high level of like his 3 core principles, and I'm going to double click and dig deeper into one of them. All right. So the principles of slow productivity are: number 1, do fewer things. Number 2, work at a natural pace. Number 3, obsess over quality. And it probably doesn't surprise you that there's an emphasis in this vision of quality over quantity, right? And the one I want to dig into is this concept of do fewer things. Now, you may get a reaction here. You might even be a little bit triggered because so many of us have internalized this program that our value actually comes from the more things that we do, the more things that we create, you know? And what if this is actually not only not true, but a massive misconception or deception? Think about this. Doing fewer things is not the same as accomplishing fewer things, right? And that's why we can get blinded by this idea of quantity, when what if we were really zooming in on the idea of quality? So here's the thing. In knowledge work, as Newport points out, anything that we say yes to, every project that we say yes to has its own built-in overhead tax. And so what he means is there's always this ongoing administration of the project itself. So all the emails, all the Slack messages, all the Zoom meetings that you have to be on related to that project end up being more expensive from a time point of view than the project itself. And so when you say yes to a project, most of us are not considering that we're saying yes to a massive bandwidth of obligation. So by doing fewer things, by reducing this amount of overhead, we're clearing our mental space so that the things that we are doing, we're doing with more awareness and more focus and more mindfulness. And that's where it gets beautiful. But let's get a little bit more practical. Like, what are the things that we can limit in order to do fewer things? Okay. So Newport gives 3 categories. Number 1, we need to limit what he calls our missions. Okay. So these are high level goals. These are what I call C-type goals. So these are kind of like life level, really ambitious horizon goals that are taking up a lot of your energy and enthusiasm, right? The more of these that you take on, the more projects you're taking on, the more daily tasks you're taking on, and that overhead tax eventually is going to burn you out. So my golden rule is always try to limit your high-level missions to 2, maybe 3. One kind of metric you can use or system you can use is 1 career-related mission, 1 personal development-related mission. And if you're really lucky, those are intertwined in this one and the same, right? But if you can limit your high-level missions, that's going to be one way at the day-to-day level, how you're going to be able to do fewer things. Again, not accomplish fewer things, but your daily load is going to be lower. Number 2, limit projects. And Newport defines projects as anything that takes more than 1 sitting or 1 session to complete. Again, same concept. So within a mission, you're going to have multiple projects. It's not that these are things that won't have to get done. The question is, how many of these do you take on at a time? How much of your focus gets scattered by taking on too many projects that are part of a mission versus reducing that number of projects so that you can focus in on them with more clarity and spaciousness. This is a word I really like, right? And finally, at the daily level, limit your daily goals. And I want to add my own insights here, because this is something that I've been working on for years, really, is at the daily level, managing my load, managing my focus. And so there's a system that I've adopted that's been really effective, but it came through some experimentation and trial and error. So I did a little experiment. I was trying to manage, like many entrepreneurs, I was trying to manage, this daily productivity game. It's like, how can I maximize? And I started to find that these online productivity systems, like whether it's some kind of fancy to-do list or whatever, the app for this, for that, it's really enticing in the beginning because it's got all the bells and whistles. It seems like it's going to really enhance you and help your productivity. But here's the thing about digital forms of to-do lists is that they're literally infinite. There's no end. There's no done. And so there's no sense of measure. There's no sense of containment. It's literally like the incentive to finish any portion of your list is diminished because you know that there's 18,000 more things just waiting in line on that list. So I started to think, all right, maybe I go old school. Maybe I start to go analog, and on a daily basis, I organize my thinking and my focus just with what's right in front of me on a literal physical piece of paper. And I actually found a system built on this philosophy. I'm not a spokesperson or an affiliate, so I'm not trying to plug them, but this has been a real powerful for me. And so it's based on this concept of you have these daily cards, okay? And on each card, there's a finite number of slots. There's 10 on here because productivity experts have actually said that in a given day, you're not going to do more than 6 to 8 big things, important things, or meaningful things. And I did an experiment for myself. And for several days, I sat down in the morning and I did just a brain dump of everything that was on my mind that felt important. Like all the things there that I felt like had to be done. And I found that on any given morning, that list of things that had to be done that day or else was about 25 to 30 things. And it was absurd. It was absurd. No one does 25 to 30 meaningful things in a day. We often overestimate ourselves, but even a hyped up entrepreneur knows that 25 to 30 meaningful things are not going to happen in a day. So I was also very aware of the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle tells us that about 80% of our results are going to come from 20% of the things that we do. That's why it's also known as the 80-20 rule. And so I started to think, okay, Ben, you've got this list of 25 to 30 things on any given day that feel essential, that feel important, but they're all not. Right? So what is the 20% of those things? What is the 20% of those things that are going to bring the most value and impact and move your project, move your mission forward? And so, do the math. That comes down to about, 5 to 8 things from that list of 25 to 30 are going to be that sweet 20%. And so I started to use this system. So now what I do is I sit down in the morning and I force myself to narrow it down to those 5 to 8. I confess some days I fill this up with 10, but no more than 10 things that are going to be my focus for that day. And that's my obligation. That's how I define my win for the day. It's those 10 things. Some days are bigger and more dramatic and sexy than others. Some days are just 10 very simple things that I know are not glorious or glamorous, but they're going to move my mission forward. And that's enough. And then the next day, you know what I do? I take the previous day's card. I evaluate. Are there any things that carried over? Did I not get them done for a good reason? Or do I need to carry them over to this day? I add them to that day and then I do them. Now, okay, so what happens when something comes up during the day, a big idea comes? Do I disrupt this? Well, if someone's life is on the line or my house is on fire or World War III has broken out, maybe. But otherwise, this is my focus. It's the deal that I made with myself. And if you have the discipline to stick with that, day by day, you look back and you're amazed at how far you've come with these small, simple focuses on a daily basis. But the system is interesting because if things do come up that feel important, that are important, don't worry. There's another card, which is a slightly different color, which is called the next card. And this is a place where you can list those things. These are important. These are on radar, but they're not today. But you don't have to lose them. You can track them on these next cards. And then what about those real big ideas that are kind of like those wild card ideas that come to you? Well, don't worry. There's also another card called the someday card. And this is like the dream space, right? Like you don't want to lose those ideas either. So get them down right here. So this is my practical offering in connection to this idea of slow productivity and how we can do fewer things in general, but at the daily level in particular. Because if you can manage your day, that's step one. That's layer number one of making really tremendous changes across your life, right? Manage your day, stay on mission, stay focused, even when it's not sexy. And over time, you start to feel this momentum. You've got this virtual cycle developed. And before you know it, you have accomplished big things. So by doing less, you're accomplishing more. All right. Let me know if there's some systems that you've tried, what's worked, what hasn't, and any insights you have about slow productivity that actually lifts your satisfaction and your creation.